They control every aspect of your life. They control the money supply, the education, and medical systems. They control our food and water, the media. They create wars for money and to protect the systems they have set up. But what's their end goal? The global currency under a central military dictatorship. You and your future children will be enslaved into the system for your entire life. Under this world government, they will control every aspect of your life, down to the smallest details. This will be achieved by deliberately dragging the world into war. And in the aftermath, the public will be looking to the government for help. And without even knowing, they will blindly support the same people who dragged them into the war in the first place. They will install the world government under the perception that it will help fix all the world's problems and stop all the wars. But it will be put there by the same people who intentionally create the problems. If we let it get to this, Earth will no longer be a pleasant place to live. Giving lots of power to a very few will, and always has, led to corruption.
Over the last 2 years, journalists and activists have been fighting a specific provision in the annual National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, through a lawsuit called Hedges v. Obama. It's called Section 1021B, otherwise known as the Indefinite Detention Clause, which gives the U.S. military the right to indefinitely detain U.S. citizens anywhere in the world, including right here in America.
This not only attacks your First Amendment rights, it attacks your Fifth Amendment rights, your due process clause, because this gives not the U.S. government, but the U.S. military the right to detain you and indefinitely with no due process.
Let's first take a look in the past. In 1945, the dollar was established as the world reserve currency. This meant international commodities were priced in dollars. It was made under the condition that these dollars were redeemable for gold. The Federal Reserve was now able to print as much as they wanted, because they did not allow records for what they had printed. Leading up to the 70s, during the Vietnam War, the U.S. made it very obvious that they were spending more money than they had backed by gold. This led other countries to start withdrawing their gold, which rapidly decreased the value of the dollar. In 1971, France wanted to withdraw their gold, but President Nixon declined. He suspended, what he said was temporarily, the ability to convert the dollar to gold. This was not temporary, it was permanent. In 1973, the petrodollar was born. An agreement with the main oil developing countries was made. They were to only accept U.S. dollars as payment for oil and to invest their profits in U.S. Treasury bonds, notes and bills. In return, the U.S. would protect the oil fields. By 1975, every member of OPEC was selling their oil in U.S. dollars. Taking the dollar off gold and using foreign oil to back the dollar instantly made every oil importing country in the world need a constant supply of Federal Reserve paper. And in order to get that paper, they had to send the U.S. real resources. During the Cold War, the U.S. had an endless supply of money. Because of the petrodollar scam, they could spend as much as they wanted on their military. The U.S. outspent every other country in the world combined. The collapse of the communist bloc removed the last threat to the U.S. They now had control of the world because of their huge military spending. In 1991, the U.S. invaded Iraq in the first Gulf War. They destroyed their water purification plants and hospitals, and imposed huge sanctions. These actions killed over 500,000 children, and they knew exactly what they were doing.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They've just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran." The truth is about the Middle East is, had there been no oil there, it would be like Africa. Nobody is threatening to intervene in Africa. The problem is the opposite. We keep asking for people to intervene and stop it. And there's no question that the presence of petroleum throughout the region has sparked great power involvement. Whether that was the specific motivation for the coup or not, I can't tell you, but there was definitely, there's always been this attitude that somehow we could intervene and use force in the region.
The thing you have to understand the most is, Russia and China have publicly stated that they will not tolerate an attack on Iran or Syria. They have said if Iran or Syria are attacked, they will retaliate. They have a mutual defense agreement. This will drag the world into war. We will all be divided on the conflict and fighting against each other. This is a projected agenda. That is why every day it looks like they are getting closer and closer to gaining public support for these attacks. The thing you have to understand the most is, Russia and China have publicly stated that they will not tolerate an attack on Iran or Syria. They have said they will attack the U.S. if Iran or Syria are attacked. This will drag the world into war.
I frankly think that crisis initiation is really tough. And it's very hard for me to see how the United States president can get us to war with Iran. Which leads me to conclude that if, in fact, compromise is not coming, that the traditional way of America gets to war is what would be best for U.S. interests. Some people might think that Mr. Roosevelt wanted to get us into World War II, as David mentioned. You may recall we had to wait for Pearl Harbor. Some people might think Mr. Wilson wanted to get us into World War I. You may recall he had to wait for the Lusitania episode. Some people might think that Mr. Johnson wanted to send troops to Vietnam. You may recall he had to wait for the Gulf of Tonkin episode. We didn't go to war with Spain until the until the Maine exploded. And may I point out that Mr. Lincoln did not feel he could call out the Federal Army until Fort Sumter was attacked, which is why he ordered the commander at Fort Sumter to do exactly that thing which the South Carolinians had said would cause an attack. So if, in fact, the Iranians aren't going to compromise, it would be best if somebody else started the war. One can combine other means of pressure with sanctions. I mentioned that explosion on August 17th. We could step up the pressure. I mean, look, people, Iranian submarines periodically go down. Someday one of them might not come up. Who would know why? We can do a variety of things if we wish to increase the pressure. I'm not advocating that, but I'm just suggesting that this is not a either-or proposition. It's just sanctions has to succeed or other things. We are in the game of using covert means against the Iranians. We could get nastier at that.
In November of 2000, Iraq started selling their oil in euros. They were making 15 to 20% more selling in euros rather than dollars. This was a direct attack to the U.S.-dominated money system. This is when the U.S. and the media started saying that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, but this was just a propaganda campaign. They also used the impacts of 9/11 to gain public support. In 2003 they invaded Iraq, and as soon as the oil fields were in U.S. control, the sales were switched straight back to the dollar.
In the Matrix movie, there's something called the Zion mainframe. Well, Zionism, Rothschild Zionism, is in so many ways a mainframe of this network, and it pervades all the way through. Obama's immediate handler is a guy called Rahm Emanuel. He has served in the Israeli army. He's the White House Chief of Staff. He does whatever he says. His father, Emanuel's father, was a terrorist in the Irgun terrorist group that bombed Israel into existence in 1948. This guy is the second handler in the White House. His name's David Axelrod, Rothschild Zionist, and he was the man who orchestrated the entire election campaigns of Obama against Hillary Clinton and then against John McCain. The main funder and orchestrator of the funding in terms of individuals of Obama was a guy called George Soros, Rothschild Zionist, who manipulates countries and uses his networks and funding to create coups in countries where they want to change the regime change. And he bets on currencies like he bet on the pound years ago and makes a fortune out of the demise of the economy of other countries because he has no empathy. Henry Kissinger, massive Rothschild Zionist, has served that dynasty's agenda for 40 years, if not 50 years. And he's now an advisor to Obama, even though he's officially a Republican. The American economy, the American economic team, is led by Timothy Geithner, Treasury Secretary, Rothschild Zionist, and Larry Summers, Rothschild Zionist. The entire Obama budget is run by the budget director, Peter Orszag, Rothschild Zionist. This man was advising the Russian treasury when the Russian governments were giving state assets away to Rothschild Zionist oligarchs, including Roman Abramovich, the owner of Chelsea Football Club, by the way. It's very easy to become a billionaire when a state says, have these assets worth $1 billion, billions of pounds, thank you very much. It's a piece of cake. You could buy a football club if you want. And this man's company was also advising the Icelandic Central Bank in the run-up to the Icelandic crash. The Federal Reserve in America, which controls the American economy in so many ways, it's a privately owned, not government-owned central bank, and it's privately owned by the Rothschilds and the affiliates of the Rothschilds, is Bernard Bernanke, Rothschild Zionist. He replaced Alan Greenspan, Rothschild Zionist, who was head of the Federal Reserve from Reagan Bush right up into the Boy Bush administration, and he systematically took away the checks and balances which allowed the mayhem of 2008 to unfold. We keep hearing about Goldman Sachs and all the mayhem that it's created, both in the crash of 2008 and the crash of the economy in Greece, fundamentally involved Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs is a fiefdom of the Rothschilds, headed by Lord Blankfein, Rothschild Zionist. The World Bank, headed by a Rothschild Zionist. The IMF, International Monetary Fund, headed by a Rothschild Zionist. European Central Bank, headed by a Rothschild Zionist. A stream of so-called czars, as they call them in America, controlling different policies and areas, policy areas of the Obama administration, Rothschild Zionists, including Cass Sunstein, who has actually written a paper saying people who have conspiracy theories should either be banned from expressing them or taxed for expressing them. Taxed! Climate change policy in the Obama administration is controlled by Carol Browner, Rothschild Zionist, and Todd Steen, Rothschild Zionist. Major area of policy. The American administration is utterly awash with Rothschild Zionists, and that is not by accident. It's because they're agents of the dynasty or agents of the control system.
The odds don't matter anymore. If you understand what we are facing, then you have a moral responsibility to do everything in your power to alter the course that we're on, regardless of the odds. It's only when you stop basing your involvement on the chance of success that success actually becomes possible. To strip the ill-gotten power of the financial elites and to bring these criminal cartels to justice will require nothing less than a revolution. The government is not going to save us. The government is completely infiltrated and corrupt to the core. Looking to them for help is completely arrogant. We have to actively work to wake up as many people as possible about what is happening and the direction we are heading. All revolutions originate from a shift in the mindset of the population, and no other meaningful resistance is possible without it. When an idea hits critical mass, it begins to spread on its own and spreads to all levels of society. We need more people in this fight. We need more people speaking out, making videos, writing articles, getting this information onto the national and international stage.